You might remember earlier this month that several students from Knox Grammar School in Sydney were suspended or expelled after they shared racist and violent messages on a group chat. In response, the New South Wales Premier, Dominic Perrottet, said, and I quote, "A radical move was needed," and announced the government would appoint a chief behaviour advisor to work with all schools in the state.
And we want to have our classroom environments having the best behavioural environments that they can be. And working with specialists, working with the chief behavioural advisor, we will get key learnings. We'll work very closely with teachers, very closely with principals, but also with parents.
That's the New South Wales Premier, Dominic Perrottet, speaking earlier this week. So, is the Chief Behavioural Advisor a good idea? Dr. David Roy is a lecturer at the University of Newcastle School of Education, and Chanel Contos is a sexual consent activist who's been working with both the state and the federal governments to improve consent education in schools. And they're both our guests this morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Patricia.
Chanel, let's start with
Hi,
you.
Patricia.
A global search for this chief behavioural advisor is underway. The idea is that they'd assist teachers across all schools in the state about how to deal with disruptive students and advise parents and carers too. What do you think of the idea?
I think it's a good step in the right direction because I think that any resources allocated towards the school system is a good thing. However, obviously they can be used in different ways depending on what the outcome wants to be. So my qualms with it is that behavioural advisor is a very broad term, and I'm not entirely sure what the government's intentions are in this space. So for example, if we're talking about students who are being disruptive in class because perhaps, their home life, there's something wrong at home, or they're coming from poverty, or those sort of things, or, mental health issues or learning difficulties, it's very different to the type of behaviour that these Knox Grammar students and other schools exhibited, which is very mainstream cultural misogyny, racism, homophobia that is existing all around our country.
David, you've previously worked at a private boys' school in Sydney. Is this kind of behaviour surprising to you?
No, it's neither surprising to me, having worked in a private boys' school, as well as having worked in some of the most deprived schools in Europe, that children are modelling the society around them, they're modelling the behaviour that they see, the attitudes they have, and it's very saddening that this happens, that technology allows them to spread it. And I think it's a systemic societal issue, and we need to deal with it as a society, not just within the schools, though of course we need to deal with it, whether it be misogyny or it be racism, anti-Semitism, which is one of the issues I dealt with as a teacher when I was working in schools. These are issues that continually carry on, and they need to be confronted directly, and it's everyone's responsibility to challenge it, including parents and community. And those people who are silent or passive observers of it, they actually need to stop being silent and passive and standing up against this.
So, David, what support do teachers actually need in this space? And could a chief behavioural officer appointed by the government provide that kind of leadership?
I'm not convinced that a chief behavioural officer will provide that. They've introduced these ideas for the past 10 years in England, and there hasn't been a significant change in behaviour. I worry it comes over as a punitive measure, trying to kind of have a coercion within the school system to conform, and that kind of cookie cutter approach doesn't work for the majority of children. It's all about those personal relationships with individuals. It's about finding proactive solutions and working with every stakeholder in the community, the parent, the teacher, the friends, the children, to find out why are you behaving in this way, and why are you using this type of behaviour to communicate what you're doing, whether it be through disruptive behaviour in the classroom or deeply disturbing attitudes that are being displayed by individuals in WhatsApp groups.
The New South Wales Education Minister has called the boys' actions appalling. Now, the messages were also referred to the police for review. Chanel Contos, what really needs to be done to address the root cause of behaviour steeped in what you've described as, often homophobia, racism, misogyny, these sorts of sentiments?
Echoing David's thoughts, it's very much a societal issue, and these boys are essentially being products of their own environment. They're mimicking what they're seeing subconsciously in media, on social media, with parents, conversations, teachers, their peers. So I truly believe that education can be used for significant cultural change. It can be transformative in that way, but it needs to be a really holistic approach. We need to be having conversations about power dynamics and about oppression and about the reality of experiences for women and other minority groups across kind of all aspects of the curriculum in different ways. So, there's a lot that needs to be done, but it can be done from the bottom up and the top down at the same time.
David, obviously social media plays a big role in all of this, or, the way that young people communicate. That is our world. People, communicate online. How would a behaviour advisor realistically be able to oversee social media use among teenagers?
Well, that's the whole issue I have with this, and the amount of money that would be spent on both searching for someone internationally and the fact that they potentially could be being paid more than our own politicians are paid. I think there's better use of resources. How they're already putting some good processes into place within the schools, with the change in the discipline policy, with consideration of collaborative and proactive solution CPS being applied, which is an evidence-based way of supporting children, and putting lots more psychologists and support workers into schools. That's a good use of resources rather than another individual administration at the top dictating down to teachers who already know how to deal with the kids because they're experts with the kids because they're with them all the time. I think one of the big things we also have to remember is that these are children. Sometimes when we talk about discipline and behaviour in schools, we forget that we're talking about children rather than about adults. And so therefore they need to be approached slightly differently because they're still immature, they're still growing, and some of the, shall we say, punitive measures that we would apply to adults don't work quite the same way with children because they are still very young. So again, it's about, as was said, we need to educate the families. We need to see where is this attitude coming from and go to the source of the issue rather than putting band-aids on top of something that's already happened.
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it, Chanel? When we talk about behaviour, there's the behaviour you've been calling out, for instance, this toxic behaviour among some boys. And then there are other behavioural issues that teachers are also reporting that's making it difficult for them to actually do the educating and also difficult for other students in the classroom. And then there's the disproportionate impact it has on Indigenous kids or kids with a disability, perhaps. Chanel, do you worry that vulnerable students could benefit least from this kind of attention? How does a chief behavioural officer deal with the whole spectrum of that kind of behaviour?
It's hard to think how one person could possibly do that. But I guess in my mind, this role is kind of split into two tasks. There's going to be, almost like the reprimanding of behaviour in a traditional school way in terms of consequences for poor actions, and then trying to ensure that children are fostered in a way that ensures that this is preventative and that, they're safe in schools and that sort of thing. But I think that sort of angle of it could disproportionately affect already marginalised students. But on the other hand, and what I hope that this advisor does do, and what my ideal vision for the end of this role is a behavioural advisor that's focusing on, changing the minds of the silent majority. So we've got a loud minority of young people who are disruptive, who overtly say homophobic, racist, sexist things, disrupt classroom learning. But the silent minority is really where we're going to get cultural change from. And I hope that we're focusing, this role has a positive lens on it in terms of creating a positive culture and an inclusive culture that will mean that it won't adversely affect those minority groups.
The government is also rolling out new Respect Awards to recognise students who exhibit high standards of respectful and inclusive behaviour. David Roy, would this do anything to counter the behaviour we've seen from the likes of those, for instance, as an example, the Knox Grammar schoolboys?
Oh, absolutely not. I have to say, of all the clickbait thought bubbles that came out of the government as we come up towards a New South Wales election, this was one of the worst ones. You take an example of a school of 1,500 students. One child gets recognised for being well behaved, then goes on to a state final. What message is that sending to other kids, other than the fact that they feel, and I spoke to quite a few children over the last 2 days. I have kids in schools and I speak to their friends as well. Every single one felt it's slightly patronising. They recognise that good behaviour isn't always recognised, but they're not wanting a gold star to be told that they're a well-behaved child. What all of them said was, we just want teachers and adults to listen to us and care and recognise that we've got ideas and treat us with respect. The same way that we need to model to kids in the classroom the respect we want them to show, we have to show them that back. And we have to recognise that doesn't always happen, as Chanel was saying, for children who are marginalised, whether they're First Nation children or children with a disability, who both groupings get, should we say, disproportionately targeted within punitive measures in schools at the moment.
What do you think, Chanel? Could Respect Awards help?
To be honest, I think it's quite patronising as well. I mean, maybe you've got a 4-year-old. But it's also just kind of a strange concept, because ultimately our country's ethics should mean that what is good behaviour is the minimum and what is expected. That should kind of be the bar. So I don't know. It's a strange concept. I think that's going to encourage good behaviour. My stream of work is very much focused on eliminating everyday microaggressions and cultural attitudes and beliefs that contribute to the ongoing and ever-present marginalisation of girls and women. And I feel like this advisor would definitely need to steer in a very proactive direction towards education and attitude change in order for that to benefit this in any way. And I agree with David that if the focus is on trying to prevent those overtly disruptive kids in the classroom, who, by the way, I really highly doubt any of those Knox boys in that group message were. I'm sure they were all, great students who had their shirt tucked in. For that to happen, I think, the funding and resources need to be localised. And I know the government has said that they're going to more than double their resources, of having from 70 to 200 of individuals in individual state schools to work on issues like that. And I think things like that is a very productive measure.
It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you to both of you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on again.
Thanks, Chanel. Dr. David Roy, lecturer at the University of Newcastle School of Education. Chanel Contos is an Australian student and sexual consent activist, and many of you have been texting in about this idea of a chief behavioural officer that the New South Wales government is now trying to headhunt somebody to play this role. A couple of text messages here. At least the government recognises behaviour in schools as an issue impacting teachers' morale, but will it just become another professional development tick and flick activity for an already stressed workforce to endure? Lee is a classroom teacher of 30 years and says any new initiative from the Department of Education just means more paperwork for the classroom teacher. That's all it will be. And that is the spirit of many text messages in terms of the implementation of this. This too, as someone privately educated and later worked in private schools, it doesn't surprise me on one hand, but it does, given the amount of time and effort and spent on the topics. This too, a chief behavioural advisor will have little effect. Where the help is required is in schools with specialists helping class teachers, classes where students can withdraw for their own benefit, and for others, counsellors and aides in classrooms. Keep your views coming through. 0418 226 576 is our text line. I'd love to hear from you this morning.